I hated my mother for almost 12 years. I hated her quiet face. I hated her tired eyes. I hated the way she never explained anything. And most of all, I hated her because I believed she was the reason my father left. I was 9 years old when my father walked out of our home. It was raining that night. I still remember the sound of water hitting the window. I remember my father standing near the door with one old suitcase in his hand. I remember my mother standing in the kitchen, holding a towel so tightly that her fingers turned white. My father looked at me and smiled sadly. "Be a good boy, Noah," he said. Then he opened the door and left. I waited for my mother to run after him. I waited for her to cry. I waited for her to fall on her knees and beg him to stay. But she did nothing. She only stood there, silent and pale, as if something inside her had already died. That night, I asked her, "Why did Dad leave?" She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Go to bed, Noah." That was all. No explanation. No comfort. No promise that everything would be okay. So I created my own answer. Dad left because of her. From that night, my heart began to close. Before my father left, our home had been poor, but warm. He told jokes at dinner. He carried me on his back. He promised that one day he would take me to see the ocean. After he left, our apartment became quiet. My mother, Elena, started working 2 jobs. In the morning, she cleaned rooms at a hotel. At night, she washed dishes in a small restaurant behind the bus station. She came home late with red hands and tired feet. Sometimes, I woke up at midnight and saw her eating cold rice alone in the kitchen. She looked so exhausted that even sitting seemed difficult. But I did not feel sorry for her. I was a child, and children do not understand sacrifice. They only understand who is missing. My father was gone. My mother stayed, so I blamed the one who stayed. At school, other mothers came to events. They brought food. They took pictures. They clapped when their children received awards. My mother almost never came. When I won a small writing prize in 5th grade, I stood on the stage and looked for her in the crowd. She was not there. That evening, she came home late. Her hair was wet from the rain. She saw the certificate on the table and touched it gently. "You did well," she said. I pulled the paper away from her. "You weren't there," I said. Her face changed. But she did not argue. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I hated that answer. I wanted her to explain. I wanted her to fight. I wanted her to say something strong. But my mother was always quiet. Her silence made my anger grow. By the time I was 15, I barely spoke to her. I answered with short words. Yes. No. Fine. She still cooked for me. She still washed my clothes. She still left money on the table when she had any. But I saw none of it as love. To me, love was my father's smile. Love was his laugh. Love was the memory of him promising me the ocean. My mother was only the woman who stayed behind and ruined everything. Then, when I was 16, my father came back. I was walking home from school when I heard someone call my name. Noah. I turned around. At first, I did not recognize him. He looked older. His hair was thinner. His coat was cheap and worn. But his smile was the same. It was my father, Marcus. For a moment, I could not breathe. He opened his arms, and I walked into them like a lost child. That afternoon, he took me to a cafe. He bought me hot chocolate and asked about my life. He asked about school. He said he had missed me every day. I believed every word. Then he looked down and sighed. I wanted to see you sooner, he said. But your mother made it difficult. Those words entered my heart like poison. Your mother made it difficult. Suddenly, Everything made sense to me. Her silence, her cold face, her refusal to explain. In my mind, she had kept my father away. My father told me he had tried to come back many times. He said my mother was proud and angry. He said she did not want him near me. I did not ask for proof. I already hated her. So his story felt true. That night, I came home late. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, sewing a button onto my school shirt. "Where were you?" she asked. "With Dad," I said. The needle stopped in her hand. She looked up slowly. "He told me everything." I continued. "He said you kept him away from me." Her face became very still. "Noah," he said, "you ruined our family." For a second, I thought she would finally defend herself, but she only lowered her eyes. "Your father has his own story," she said softly. I laughed bitterly. "Of course. And you have no story." "Right. You never say anything." She looked at me with pain in her eyes. "One day, I hope you understand." I walked away before she could say more. After that, I met my father whenever I could. With him, life felt easier. He did not ask about homework. He did not tell me to come home early. He did not look tired all the time. He laughed, bought me small gifts, and called me his son. My mother gave me food. My father gave me attention. At 16, I thought attention was love. When I finished high school, I left home for college in another city. My mother helped me pack. She folded my clothes carefully and put medicine in a small bag. Before I left, she gave me an envelope. Inside was money. Not much, but I knew it was a lot for her. "You may need this," she said. I looked at the envelope and asked coldly, "Is this guilt money?" Her face went pale. "No," she said. "It's love money." I did not answer. At the bus station, she stood beside me with her old handbag. She looked small among the crowd. "Call me when you arrive," she said. I nodded, but I did not call. Not that day. Not that week. Not for months. College gave me freedom. I studied, worked part-time, and tried to build a new life. I wanted to become successful. I wanted to prove that I did not need my mother. My father called often at first. Then his calls changed. He began asking for money. At first, it was small, a little for rent, a little for food, a little for a business idea. I sent him what I could. I was still hungry for his love. I thought if I helped him, he would stay. My mother also called. I ignored most of her calls. When I answered, she asked simple questions. "Are you eating well?" "Yes." "Are you sleeping enough?" "Yes." "Do you need anything?" "No." Then I ended the call. One winter, during my second year of college, I got very sick. It started with a fever. Then my whole body became weak. I could not go to class. I could not go to work. My roommate was away, and I was alone in the apartment. For 2 days, I lay in bed, sweating and shaking. On the third night, I opened my eyes and saw my mother sitting beside me. At first, I thought I was dreaming. She was holding a wet towel. There was soup on the table and medicine beside my bed. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. "You didn't answer your phone," she said. "How did you know I was sick?" "Your roommate called me." I turned my face away. She stayed for 3 days. She cooked. She cleaned. She changed my sheets. She walked to the pharmacy in the cold rain. At night, I woke up and saw her sleeping in a chair, still wearing her coat. I should have thanked her, but when I felt better, I only said, "You can go now." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Before leaving, she touched my forehead gently. "You don't have to love me," she said, "but please take care of yourself." Then she left. That sentence stayed in my mind for years. You don't have to love me. I did not understand what kind of mother could say that. Now I know. Only a mother who had loved too long without being loved back. Years passed. I graduated, got a job, and moved into my own small apartment. I was not rich, but I was doing well. I wore clean shirts, paid my bills, and told myself I had built my life alone. Then my father disappeared again. Not completely. He came back whenever he needed something. Money, a favor, a place to stay, another loan. Slowly, I started to see the truth. He never remembered my birthday. He never asked if I was tired. He never called just to hear my voice. Every conversation ended with a request. One evening, he came to my apartment and asked for a large amount of money. He said he had a problem and needed help immediately. I told him I could not give him that much. His face changed. The warm father disappeared. "You're just like your mother," he said. I froze. "What does that mean?" He laughed. "Cold, ungrateful, always thinking you're better than others." Something inside me shifted. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the father I missed, not as the hero from my childhood, but as a man who used love when he needed something. I asked him quietly, "Why did you really leave us?" He looked away. That silence told me more than any answer. A few weeks later, my Aunt Clara called me. I had not spoken to her in years. Her voice was serious. "Noah, your mother is in the hospital." My chest tightened. What happened? She collapsed at work. I drove to the hospital that same night. When I entered the room, I saw my mother lying near the window. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair had more gray. Her hands were thin and weak on the blanket. She smiled when she saw me. "You came," she whispered. I could not speak. My aunt pulled me into the hallway. "She has been sick for a long time," she said. "How long?" "Years." Why didn't she tell me? My aunt looked at me with anger and sadness. She tried. "Noah, but you never listened." Then she told me everything. My father had not left because of my mother. He had left because of debts, gambling, and another woman. He had taken the little money my parents had saved. After he left, creditors came to our home. My mother worked 2 jobs, not only to feed me, but also to keep those men away from us. My father had contacted her many times over the years, not to ask about me, not to help us. He wanted money. When she refused, he blamed her. And when he came back into my life, it was not because he suddenly became a loving father. It was because I was old enough to be useful. I stood in the hallway, unable to move. All those years, I had hated the wrong person. My mother stayed silent, not because she was guilty. She stayed silent because she did not want me to hate my father. She protected my image of him, even while I punished her for his mistakes. I went back into her room. She was looking out the window. I sat beside her bed. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I whispered, "I'm sorry." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was cruel to you," I said. "I blamed you for everything. I believed him. I ignored you." She reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold. "You were hurt," she said. "I was wrong. You were my son," she replied. That broke me. Even then, she was still protecting me. I held her hand and cried like the 9-year-old boy who had watched his father leave. The boy who needed someone to blame. The boy who did not understand that love does not always look warm and easy. Sometimes love looks like a tired woman walking to work before sunrise. Sometimes love looks like red hands, washing dishes at midnight. Sometimes love looks like silence, because the truth would hurt a child even more. After my mother left the hospital, I brought her to live with me. At first, she refused. "I don't want to trouble you," she said. That sentence hurt deeply, because for years, I had made her feel like loving me was trouble. I prepared the small bedroom for her. I bought warm blankets, medicine boxes, and a soft chair near the window. I learned how to cook her favorite soup. The first time I made it, it was too salty. She ate it anyway. "It's good," she said. I shook my head. "It's terrible." For the first time in years, she laughed, slowly. Our life changed. In the morning, I made tea before going to work. In the evening, we ate dinner together. Sometimes, she told me stories from when I was little. I learned that she had once wanted to open a flower shop. I learned that she loved music. I learned that she had sold her favorite radio when money became tight. One night, she told me about the day I won the writing prize. "I was there," she said softly. I looked at her. "What?" I arrived late. The bus broke down. When I reached the school, the ceremony was already over. "I saw you walking away with your certificate. You looked so disappointed. I wanted to call your name, but I felt ashamed. I could not speak. For years, I had used that memory as proof that she did not care, but she had been there, just late, just tired, just human." A few days later, I found the old envelope she had given me when I left for college. I had kept it without knowing why. Inside, there was a note I had never noticed. It said, "Noah, I know you are angry with me. Maybe one day you will understand. But even if you never do, I will always love you. Build a good life." Mom, I read the note again and again. Then I walked to her room. She was sitting near the window, folding clothes. I sat beside her. "I found your note," I said. She smiled sadly. "I wondered when you would." I lowered my head. "I don't hate you," I whispered. Her hand touched my hair. "I know." "No," I said. "I need you to hear it. I don't hate you. I was wrong." She did not give a speech. She did not ask me to explain. She only said, "Then come back to me slowly." And I did. Not in one day. I came back through small things, through tea in the morning, through medicine reminders, through quiet dinners, through listening, through asking questions I should have asked years before. Time did not return what anger had taken from us, but it gave us something else, a second chance. Months later, my father called again. He wanted to meet. I agreed. We met at the same cafe where he had once told me my mother kept him away. He looked older now, smaller, less powerful than the memory I had carried. He talked about hard times. He talked about being misunderstood. Then he started blaming my mother again. This time, I stopped him. "Don't talk about her like that." He stared at me. I stood up. "I spent half my life hating the woman who saved me. I won't spend the rest of my life listening to the man who left." Then I walked away. Not because I hated him. Hate had already stolen enough from me. I walked away because I finally knew who deserved my love. When I got home, my mother was watering a small plant near the window. I had bought it for her because she still dreamed about flowers. "Good day," she asked. I looked at her. Her hair was gray. Her hands were rough. Her body was weaker than before. But to me, she looked stronger than anyone I had ever known. "Yes," I said, "a very good day." That night, we ate a simple dinner. Rice, soap, vegetables, nothing special. But as I watched her smile quietly across the table, I felt something I had not felt since childhood. Home. For years, I thought my mother's silence meant guilt. Now I understand. Her silence was love carrying pain alone. Her tired face was not weakness. It was sacrifice. Her absence was not neglect. It was work. Rent, food, bills, and survival. And my hatred was not truth. It was a child's wound that grew into a man's mistake. I cannot get those years back. I cannot unsay the cruel words. I cannot return the nights she cried alone, but I can love her now, every morning. I make her tea, every night. I ask if she needs anything, and sometimes, when she thinks I am not looking, I see her smile at the small plant by the window. It has started to bloom. Small white flowers, quiet, simple, beautiful, just like the love I almost lost, just like my mother.